video to start. It's fun. All right, awesome. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and thank you, Marisa, for coming on our stream today. Before we begin, I'll just go through a couple of housekeeping notes and share what this series is all about. So this is the Creative Careers in Tech series, where we interview awesome Canadian folks and just awesome people in general that are working in creative industries within the tech field, and they have very unique jobs that are pretty interesting, or maybe niche roles that you might not have either full access to or full knowledge about. Even if you know, you might have like questions or it might be a little vague. So for example, our first two series were on someone who is a presentation designer, and then the second one was on someone who works in the UX as a field as an IT consultant, so a bit interesting. But today joining us is Marisa Chantakul. And Marisa, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, that is beautiful.
Okay, awesome. So today joining us is Marisa Chantakul, who is a product designer at TikTok. She's awesome. She has a very interesting and unique career background. Super creative. She studied fashion design and then transitioned into a design career and covering all the facets of design. She has a podcast and a whole bunch of other awesome stuff that she does. That podcast is called Design Picnic. It supports the Thai community by acting as a design resource for them. And she currently also shares all her tips and tricks about breaking into the world of design on her TikTok, where she has like 70,000 followers or something. And she's active on Instagram and Twitter, all these social media platforms. So thank you so much for joining us, Marisa.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So how we'll do this is that we'll spend maybe 20 minutes or so just talking about your background in particular, how you got into design, what you do, all the fun stuff that comes along with that. And then after that, we'll chat a little bit more about your job in particular. So like the career progression, how can other people start and get into this role if they're interested, what kind of skills are required, what tools you use on a day-to-day basis. So a little bit more about the nitty-gritty details. And we have the Q&A open the whole time. So if anyone has any specific questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that the whole time and are happy to answer any questions. So I have a couple of questions pre-prepared, so we can jump right into it. So the first question I had for you was, your journey in design, from what you've told me, has been pretty non-linear. When I was researching more about you, I found a ton of amazing interviews and kind of articles written about your work that were pretty interesting. So I'd love to hear more about the journey from your own words, about how you went from fashion to self-learning design and becoming, almost like a social media influencer.
Yeah, so let's see. I grew up in a pretty designy household. My mom, she was a fashion designer. So growing up, I would watch her build like a fashion label from scratch, and she did everything from like sketching, material sourcing, production, QA, all herself. And so my understanding of design process kind of started from there. And so when I was in high school, I was like, what do I want to do in college? So I was just naturally eased into pursuing fashion design. Just so my mom was expecting me to go back and carry over the label as well. But then towards the end of my senior year, I found myself feeling very like uneasy about the process and how fashion was more about the expression and users weren't really considered in the design process. And what I mean by this is, I remember in my final thesis, I was designing this super cool silhouettes, super cool textiles, but then I was helping the models get to the bathroom during their break time during the fashion show, and like helping them take the clothes off, having them like put it back on again. I was like, And throughout my internship years, when I was doing fashion, I felt like I was chasing aesthetics over utility, and I just felt like I didn't like how there was no rationale behind a decision that
Mm,
you made, rather than it's just like, oh, I think it will pop during the fashion show. I think it will pop. It will differentiate us from other similar brands. Like we have to get these clothes on in the store and online as fast as possible. And it was more like throwing some more glitters on that dress so it would look better on the runway.
yeah.
And so, but then I went to school in the Bay Area and I had many friends in tech, and I would join them for like holiday parties. I would hang out with a lot of product designers at that time, so that was how I was introduced to product
Mhm.
design. But I wasn't tech savvy at all, and I just grew up with fashion. I thought that I was meant to do that. But then UX or product design at that point wasn't a big thing yet, and there was not a lot of schools were offering it. There were a lot of Medium articles though. I was trying to talk to designers who are already well in their career, and they came from fashion design as well. To I just talked to them to find out if this is really for me and how hard it would be to transition from something that is super not technical and not tech at all into something like full on software. And it was really hard for me as well to persuade my parents and to stop what I was doing at that time. My mom was really upset, like, why? Like, we grew up doing this together. And I was like, something in my gut was like, no, I think product design is something for me. And then when I was trying to familiarize myself with product design, I started a Kickstarter project called Mesh. So what that is a modular piece of fabric that allow people to like kind of invent their own fashion items. It's like Legos for fashion. You have these little pieces and you piece it together and make it a tote bag, make it I don't know, a dog leash, just anything at all. And so here I learned how to transport users' need into our product, and I was able to raise some money to support myself at that time and go to grad school as well. And then at that same time, I started a podcast, Design Picnic, that you just mentioned earlier, with a friend from middle school. She is a very good friend of mine and one of the most talented designer I have ever met. And she was like, hey, I have this one podcast idea. Would you be interested in co hosting it with me? And I was like, sure. I probably wouldn't be that insightful, but I can help facilitate the podcast if that is okay with you and help make graphics and all that stuff. And through many episodes that we produced, I was able to meet so many design experts whom I call friends and mentors today. So yeah, that was my journey, and I went to UW for MSCID, which is human centered design, and then yeah, it just started my TikTok channel and now landed a role at TikTok.
That's awesome. I mean, it's so varied going from fashion to being in the tech field and actually working on a project that kind of mixes the two is pretty interesting. Before we dive deeper, though, I saw a couple more new folks join. So I just want to mention that if we could, for all the resources that we're going to be talking about today, so things like the curated job board that Marisa has, her own links, like contact links, some books that she recommends, and even some Microsoft Learn modules if you wanted to learn more about product design. They're all in that check-in link that I just pasted in the comments. I'll put it on screen as well. Super quick, takes a second. But if you enter the event code 14328, it'll show you all the links that we're going to mention. So you don't have to copy paste things all the time. Just a little bit easier. But yeah, so quick plug there. But going back to what you mentioned, I'm really interested in knowing more about some parallels that you might have found between fashion design, human computer interactions, so like HCI, or UX design, or
Mhm.
even just traditional like graphic design elements. If you found any things that are kind of common or very different between the four things.
There's a lot of research figure out who in fashion as well, who are you designing this for? Is this for kids wear, men's wear, women's wear? For UX design, you'd be sometimes you have a product with a two-sided market, for example, Shopify with a business owner and customers, or fashion design, you can be targeting this piece which only be used for the runway, or like
Mhm.
something like Uniqlo where it's everyday wear.
Yeah.
And then there's also like competitor analysis where you have to look into trend and color for fashion design. And same thing as UX design, like before you jump into designing anything at all, you want to just go in and see who has done what you're trying to do before and how did they do it and what is working and what is not working. And from there you want to be able to like, okay, I don't want to bring this feature in because it didn't do well, because you don't want to reinvent the
Mhm.
wheel. If someone's done it before, then there you go, like you got a free research. And then for both of the industries, you have to be very flexible, very adaptive. I remember had to carry my sewing kits everywhere in the backstage, and just like, because human bodies change every single day, all the time. You just have to be flexible with that. And for product design or UX design, you just have to be flexible with the process. Sometimes the engineers might discover a new bugs or new technical constraints that you didn't really consider when you were designing it before they
Yeah.
get to implement it. So you have to be able to be flexible there as well. And then I think one of the most important thing, or one of the strongest parallel between these two is the eye for visual design, and just the hierarchy, the colors, and color accessibility. And the design process is different, but you always start with researching, and then you go into ideating, and then you just present it to different stakeholders, and then you iterate, and then you source what materials you need, or with tech you source like who do you need help with, like which engineers you need to bring on, and then production, and following up
Mhm.
after production and see if there's anything else that needs to be changed. And so, and there's also a lot of soft skills or like communication skills that I feel like is it applied to almost every industry that we
Yeah,
work
that's true.
in. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I feel like obviously the soft skills are very important as well. It seems like, especially if you are collaborating with all these engineers and different folks on the teams and working with probably like upper level management, you need to have something like more than just the design skills or like the knowledge behind the technical aspects. You have to be able to share that. So that's a really important thing that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Well, that's really interesting. Um, Before we dive a bit deeper into you in particular, I'd love to know more about some of your projects. So, if you'd like to share, are there any projects that you think you're very proud of, or are a good representation of the kind of work that you have done in your life as a product designer?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned Design Picnic, and then Mesh, which is a Kickstarter project. I
Mhm.
also worked on Uplift locally. I remember last year during the looting from BLM, I, with my friend, created this website that created all the Black-owned businesses in
Mhm.
the United States, whether that be restaurants or nail salons. And that was one of the project I was the most proud of.
Yeah.
I felt like I was able to make an impact outside of my 9 to 5. And
Mhm.
then an ongoing project would be my TikTok and Instagram channel product design. And I feel like learn every day, just every single new content that I produce. I feel like I learn something new, because I would have to be like always on the hunt, like looking for new resources, looking for like new design tips that sometimes I don't even know. So the
Yeah.
best way to like learn something also is to teach something as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's sweet. All right, perfect. So my next question was going to be, so it's kind of seems like you've made a community and you work in community-based events and projects a lot. Like you mentioned, you have some Sorry, we have a question from someone in the chat who just asked, will this event be available offline? So I'm just going to quickly plug that and say, yes, we are recording this event. It will be available on this link. As soon as the event ends, you can just bookmark it, save it, like it, whatever you need to do, and you can watch it later on as well. But going back to my question, so you do a lot of social impact stuff and community building stuff, and it seems like you've kind of made that a cornerstone of your personal brand almost. Why/how is that important to you?
Yeah, I feel like to do like something outside of 9 to 5 is something that I feel very strongly about, is to create your own like online brand that defines who you are, and not what company you work at or what title you own, like on LinkedIn. And I feel like what you do outside, um, will help you in the future. So, for example, maybe I'm working in healthcare right now in tech, but I know that one day I want to work in like the social media field, like TikTok. So I just started a TikTok channel, wanting to just understand how the app works and just how content creation works. And I feel like that is something that we all can do. But I know like getting caught up by our daily work routine, and yeah, it can be hard, but I just want to say out there that creating your brand identity will really help you in the long run if you maybe want to start your own business one day as well. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you did. I mean, there's so many ways to answer that question, but I think whatever is true for you is what you shared, which is great. All right, so let's get into it. I want to know, how do you describe being a product designer? Because I feel like people, like you mentioned, there's so many different ways people can answer a question and how they describe what they do in their job. And I feel like designers kind of come in all shapes and sizes depending on what type of design they do. So yeah, in your own words, how do you describe a product designer?
Yeah, I would say is really that understanding of the user emotions and the functional needs, and just the and the business needs. So making sure a product or service is usable, also enjoyable and accessible to all kind of demographics. And while I think many companies use the term user experiences, but it's most often associated with websites and apps. So, but we can also design like kiosks, a vending machine, and how the I don't know, TSA airport line, like that
Yeah.
experience that you're going to the airport, how, so that would be like service design, and making sure that the product flows from one phase to the next one, like from login to like onboarding to like the actual usage of the app. And so I also think that the majority of what UX designers do on their job every day is communication and articulating why you design this rectangle on the screen. Like you
Yeah.
have to be able to back up every single thing that you do, which is so different from like fashion design or any other traditional traditional art and design. And so yeah, that's
Okay.
how I would describe product.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you were to Google what does a product designer do, it would probably cover most of what you already said. Um, but everyone's job in product design is so different that it's hard to tell. So thank you for sharing your own perspective on it. Um, Follow-up question, it's kind of in a similar vein. Um, what career pathways did you think were possible for you? Because you, like you mentioned earlier, you started off in formal education for fashion design, and then you self-taught yourself design skills and knowledge. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap as well because you're still in the creative field. But what career pathways did you think were possible for you when you were in school, and did you expect to end up here?
Yeah. So you're talking about like when I was in fashion school, or when I was like considering product design and see what directions I should
Mhm.
or
Yeah, like when you're transitioning into something that's not fashion,
mhm.
and then within the world of design, there's so many pathways too. So why did you go the app building route, and working with social media, especially for TikTok that you work now?
Yeah, there's so many design career directions that you can go with. If you decided to
Yeah.
be a product designer, you can also consider UX researcher, like conducting
Mhm.
research, surveys, questionnaires, and conducting user interviews. I
Yeah.
have a lot of classmates who are user UX researchers and they love it. Like they are just so natural at like talking to people and like a good listener. So a lot of my friends who came from a psychology background would naturally ease into pursuing UX researcher. Or there's also a UX writer, which is AKA a content designer. And what they do is they work with me, a product designer, a user researcher, and see the make sure the copy on the screen like convey the right feelings, and then making sure that the user can complete the task. Sometimes when I get stuck with design, I would just reach out to my UX writer and see like, hey, I don't know if there's like how else can we solve this? Maybe we can solve it with just a little piece of writing. It doesn't have to be like we don't have to revamp and redesign the whole app. Like
Mhm.
sometimes tweaking a little content here and there might help. Or you can be a UI designer, so being responsible for the looks and feels of product and making sure you are the design system is well maintained and iterative, and or if you love prototyping or doing animation, there's also interaction designer role. And with this role, you're responsible for prototyping and so that you can show it to the stakeholders and see if this
Mhm.
animation, the screen, like flying in right and left, like how does that feel?
Yeah.
Or there's also this really cool new emerging role with VR and AR designer. And I have a lot of classmates who are like immersive XR designer as well. And what they do is they work with like more spatial design. Like it's not just 2D on the screen. It's more like how do you foresee the future when everything
Mhm.
is virtual?
Yeah.
And another really cool thing about working in product design or UX design is that you can do like industry hopping. Like, let's say you love fintech, like you can go work in fintech for a little bit if you came from a finance or business background. But if you came from like healthcare background, you can work in like health tech or ed tech, education, or like e-commerce and just media. Like, I think that's the beauty of design career that you just can be in so many verticals.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, especially the emerging tech space. Um, that's so cool. I think so for the folks in the audience, VR, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality, XR, I actually don't know what that is.
Yeah, so that is like just multimedia, similar
Oh,
to VR and AR. Yeah, you just
okay, sweet.
group them together. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, there's so much new stuff coming up all the time. And speaking of, there's so much out there. I'm sure even when you were doing or learning design and going to all these resources, there's probably a ton of things, like YouTube videos or blogs or I don't know, online courses that you can take or stuff like that. That there's all teaching you so much. And I'm sure it's difficult to know what is kind of like the holy grail to look at. So I find it pretty interesting that you're so open and sharing your information. And I love that there's a lot of questions in the chat. Please keep them coming. We're going to take them up very quickly. But yeah, so there's a ton of content out there, and you're really open and upfront and kind of don't really gatekeep a lot of information. Um, I'm just curious, why are you so open? Did you run into things like you were looking for more information to kind of break into this career and you didn't find it? Or you just found that there's a lack of information out there? I'm just curious what put that in your head.
Yeah, I think gatekeeping in the industry is a real issue. Like, there's so much demand in a UX or product designer role, but somehow it's just so hard to break into like the field if you don't go to the right school or go to like a
Mhm.
like I don't know Ivy League or very highly respect design schools. And when I was in high school or when I was a freshman in college, like I never heard of this like UX world or like product design world.
Yeah.
And I just felt like because I didn't know that this career exists, I was just blindly doing like fashion stuff. And I wasn't bad at it, but I just didn't feel satisfied. And I felt like I'm pretty sure that a lot of people, a lot of students out there are also unsure about what they're doing in college. And I felt like most designers are on Twitter, and Twitter can be a pretty intimidating space for like Gen Z kids, like who doesn't have any followers, or like it's hard to like connect with some people there. And I know that a lot of younger folks are like hanging out on TikTok, and I remember downloading TikTok in the beginning of the pandemic. And me and my friend were just like, let's see if anyone has done any UX design or product design. And I was just looking up product design, and I found out that the handle was available. And I was like screaming. I was like, oh my God, I need to get this handle right now. Like, how could this handle be available? Like, at product design. And yeah, so I felt like as I mentioned before, I'm not a perfect designer. I'm still learning every day, and I felt like the best way to learn something new is also to teach something. And yeah, I had multiple mentors in the past that has really shaped who I am today. But I know some other people who might not have the time or doesn't know how to connect. Like they can just get a, a quick like bite-sized content on product design without like having to go on LinkedIn or like go to a networking event. Yeah.
Oh,
And
sorry.
also
I was muted the whole Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to give back to community because
Yeah.
currently I don't have the bandwidth to do a one-on-one mentorship on a regular basis right now. And I thought this is the least thing I can do and just to share as much as I know and just might be more effective and sharing it to like millions of people rather than like on one, which I want to do in the future as well, but not right
Mhm.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And also really fun fact that you even found the at product design handle. I'm sure some company is going to pay you like $2 million in the future to get that off you. That's great. One thing that I noticed that you post a lot about is interviewing as a designer. And that's something that I was just looking up this morning. And I'm sure, especially design interviews in general and how people conduct them and how to be fair in design interviews and what kind of things to prepare for. Um, so I'm curious, you must have had a lot of experiences with design interviews and how to be respectful to the designer's time and effort. I'm wondering if you could share a couple of things about your experiences with design interviews.
Yeah, I remember when I was looking for my first role, I was going through like, I applied to 300 roles and I got, I heard back from like maybe 5%. And I just felt so like down at that time and just so discouraged. But um, yeah, I think I've gone through like hundreds of design interviews and I was able to just pinpoint what they were looking for. And there are things that you can practice, like a whiteboard challenge or like an app critique. Like you just go on an app that you have on your phone every day that you use, and you just talk it out loud with your friends and see what if I was a designer on this app, what could I do better, and what is working, what is not working, and by doing that and just remembering the pattern and how you frame like your rationale and like the features, like it's so much
Mhm.
easier. And
Yeah.
behavioral interviews is, I don't think I've come across any surprise questions. Like if you look up on Google product design interview questions, it's just like the same 200 ones. Like, oh, what
Yeah.
is the design process? How do you deal with a tight timeline? And this is something that you can practice on. And there's also a design presentation where you walk through like 2 or 3 case studies or projects that you have worked on. And with that, I just like keep practicing, sharing my draft with my mentors, and just as practice makes perfect. And
Mhm.
I was able to like,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel as nervous anymore when I was interviewing. So
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think the post that I saw that you had was about when people or when jobs or interviewers require like two design
yeah,
calendars or something
challenge.
before they've even spoken to you in person. And I thought that was really important because I feel like some
Oh
folks that are
yeah.
just breaking into the industry might
Mhm.
think that's the norm or expect that, and they should know that that's not okay to do.
Yeah, and sometimes they would tell you like, hey, just time box yourself and only spend 2 hours on this. But let's be real, like I really want this role. Why would I only spend like 2 hours?
Yeah.
So I would be really careful about companies that required a take-home challenge, because sometimes they just want you to do free work, especially when they give you a prompt or a challenge that is so specific to the problems or the pain points that the company is facing right now. I would steer away from that. But if they, sometimes I've heard, but it hasn't happened to me, my friends, they would, if they end up not getting that interviews, some companies would compensate the candidates for that time as well. So
Mm.
just
Okay.
ask beforehand, like, hey, is this like will you be implementing my design solution? If so, I would love to be compensated if I didn't get selected. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. That's a really good point for any folks that are looking to break into product design. Keep that in mind, because I didn't know that that was a thing that companies could ask you, um, and then take it away, or maybe like take over your IP rights to an original idea based on like an interview. So good, good tidbit to know.
Yeah.
So since we have a couple questions in the chat, we can just kind of swap back and forth between the two questions that we had, because we were just still talking about your background and not really going into the specifics of your job. But if people are interested, let's talk about it. So, there's two questions about the tools and the specific technologies that you personally use. Maybe not even just in TikTok, but you as a designer, and maybe this majority of your time as a designer that you've used. So that would be maybe softwares, languages, or programs that you build with.
Yeah. So I think there are so many design and prototyping tools out there. And to be honest with you, they serve pretty much the same functionality and the same purpose. So
Yeah.
just pick one and then practice your design skills. I picked Figma just because from the research, I know that most companies are using Figma. And so when you go into an interview, like if you're using like a similar design software tool with what they're using at the company, then that's a bonus point for you. And so I would just, I think Figma, Sketch, Framer are the pretty most common one, but if you just want to do some research and find out which companies are using which tool, then maybe that could help leverage your job application as well. But I think if you're just first starting out and just practicing, then I would go with what feels most comfortable to you. Yeah.
Perfect. And then the second question was, as a product designer at TikTok, what demographics do you consider before designing a product or a solution?
Yeah. I can't talk to too many details because, the company NDA, but again, you would have to check in if there's any research being done and what the scope of this project is, and then talk to different stakeholders to get more details about who we're designing this for. And this applies to like outside of work as well. And when you're doing like portfolios, like you have to be clear in the beginning, like who this is for. Is this for kids? Is this for two-sided markets? Are there like two different type of users who are going to be using your product, like Uber when you have the driver and the commuter? So
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Um, all right, so keep your questions coming. I know there's another question that I'll take up a little bit later because we're going to talk about that a bit further. But I'd love to know what the career progression looks like. So, for example, right now, if you are a product designer and you work in this field for a couple of years, what is kind of the natural next step for this role, and how does that progress? Because, in corporate world, it's pretty straightforward. You're like,
Yeah.
a specialist, coordinator, whatever, you climb the ladder, manager, so on. But I'd love to know what comes the next after product design.
Yeah. So people usually started with an internship and then you go into a junior designer and like a regular product designer. And it's really different from designer to designer, but you can be an individual contributor, or you can also go into like a more manager like role where if you it really depends on what you want, or if you work in-house, if you work at a startup, if you work at a big tech, and then you can progress into a UX design lead or UX design manager or principal of design or VP of design in the end. Or if you decided that you don't want to climb that ladder, I have seen a lot of people who has pivoted into being like starting their own UX design consultant firm where they just talk to a bunch of early stage startups and help them frame the design experiences in the beginning. Or you can also, some designers do transition into like a product manager role, or, some people, this is very rare, but maybe a software engineer, or if you're entrepreneurial, maybe you start your own startup or you start your own design firm, design agency.
Okay, perfect. That's good to know. I think I also know a few folks who started off in UX and then they ended up in more like art director or creative director, and like very more of like an artistic, holistic role where they're doing kind of everything. So that's really awesome to hear. All right, next question, and probably the last one for that portion of our conversation today. What would you say are some pros and cons to your job now? And it doesn't not specific to the company you work for, but just design in general. What are some pros and cons with product design?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's not easy. It's pretty challenging. So let's say if you're a designer, you work in fintech, then you need to know some sort of finance. Or you work in a crypto area, then you need to know that domain pretty well to be able to design a product in that space. Another thing is it can get really hard to break into this role, and there's like some sort of pattern. You have a university recruiter go to like some universities if you are like lucky and you like happen to go to that school. And so I would say those are the two main downsides. I wouldn't say downsides. It's challenging and might requires you to be more proactive. Um, so yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
But
Thank
for
you.
the pros, like what I love about this is this really rewarding, and I feel like you are able to make an impact on such a larger scale. Whereas when I'm designing a garment, like it's just one to one. I'm sewing this, it's gonna go to one person. Whereas I'm designing this feature, I'm designing this product, and it will go out to millions of people. And just that thought sometimes scared me, but also it's super exciting at the same time. And another thing is product design. What I love is very iterative. Unlike architecture, where it has a more waterfall approach, where you spend decades just planning and designing your floor plans or whatever. But with product design, it changes just within a seconds if you work with an engineer. So
All right, awesome. Yeah, that's and I'm sure if you asked another person based on the experiences they have, their pros and cons might be different to the role. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, so let's talk about some more specifics as well. I'd love to know, because I mean we talked about this a little bit earlier as well, because there's so many resources out there, or even books to read or podcasts to listen to. I'd love to know what are some of your favorites. And I know you already sent me the list, but I'd love to let the audience hear it as well. And I'll paste them in the chat too. But yeah, some books that you've read or websites that you really like, and I'll put them in the chat.
I think the first book when I was deciding about this is really for me, and this is I know this is very like most designers talk about this book all the time, and they're like, oh, this book is everywhere, but it's the design of everyday things. this is the one book that I would recommend reading if you're trying to figure out if this role is interesting for you, if it's the right fit for you. And my second favorite is Articulating Design Decisions by Tom. And I remember I had quite a hard time just like backing up why I do things. And this book really helped me just communicating with different stakeholders and how you should approach that presentation. For example, when you're trying to persuade a software engineer, like you should be considering like just talking from like their
Yeah.
perspective versus if you're talking to a product manager, then maybe it's worth it to talk about the timeline or
Yeah.
the future, like the post MVP phase. And then my other favorites, and this is not super design focused, but I feel like it really shaped who I am today, is The Last Lecture by Randy, How I Built This podcast by Guy Raz. And then I also really, from my YouTube perspective, I love Femke channel so much. Like I really recommend like just watching all of her videos. And then I remember when I first started out, I was just nerding out on Figma YouTube tutorials and yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Awesome.
and also last thing is to understand like the product thinking and how like, Tinder became popular and how like Airbnb is successful
Mhm.
and things like that. I would really recommend looking at growth.design and just read those case studies and see like how those talented designers think like and what's that behind the scene behind those successful products.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. For all the links to all these things, if you just check in on the event resources there, I've put up the links to all the websites, some of the books, and the YouTube channels and online resources that Marisa recommends. So you can check them out there. And hopefully that helps. If not, then it's in the comments as well. And maybe you'll learn some more stuff from those resources as well. There's a follow up question to that from Albert in the chat who says, where or how do you keep up with UX design trends?
Yeah, I keep up with UX design trend by just listening to a lot of podcasts, and by Twitter is a pretty good place to just follow a bunch of like UX lead or like UX manager or a principal designer. They would be like tweeting like the newest trends, or I would sometimes subscribe to some newsletter, and it should be in the link that um, we just posted earlier. So,
Okay,
and
perfect.
sometimes like I tend to just look outside for trends too. And my favorite place to go is to go to the app store and just like
Mm.
download the most popular apps. And I swear, like my phone has like so many apps just because I just download to see like what's up and what's the hype about. Yeah.
Yeah, you need a lot of storage space if you like doing that. Sweet. All right. Any more questions? Please put them in the chat. We have one more by Data Cubist who says, "How did you find someone to mentor you?"
Yeah, this is a really good question because mentors should be that relationship should be organic, and I feel like there should be your career buddy. Let's say you're transitioning to a new title or a new company, like you want to ask his or her opinions if this would be a right fit for you, or if you want to practice your portfolio presentation. Like the mentor is really important to have. And how I found my mentors was doing that podcast. And when I was interviewing different guests for that podcast, I just reach out and just keep that relationship going. But I also, there's this website called ADP List where it's like a bunch of designers who would love to mentor and just have a spare time and would love to like help people break into the industry. And so it's super easy. You just like make an account and then you reach out to this person and then just work it out from there. And there's also some paid mentorship as well, but I would say the most organic one should be unpaid and it should come natural. And somehow that
Yeah.
relationship can also evolve into like a friendship. And yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Hope that answered your question. Please let us know if it didn't or if you have any follow-up questions. All right, perfect. So there's a follow-up question. So Opeyemi, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I believe Marisa's already answered your question about what demographics to consider. And from her own words, it really was just going back to the research team and finding out the scope and so on. So, but if you have a follow-up question to that, please let us know. The other question that I had for you was if someone starting today, they're like, well, I want to be a designer. What are some places that they should go to start? Like, this is the first place to go and really get those wheels rolling. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend like first find a transferable skills. And let's say you come from a fashion designer or from a software engineer, like find that skills that you're able to leverage in product design. Like if you're able to code just a little bit, that's like a huge bonus point for you. Like the skill set that you can bring from a previous industry will always be the most important asset. And then you can also just find out what the skill gap you're missing. If you're already a super talented graphic designer, then maybe prototyping will be more natural to you. But if you're not, then you would have to hone in on the skills a little bit more. And what I would first do is to think about that skill gap that you're
Yeah,
missing. Find out
okay.
if this role is right for you and reach out to people who had this similar previous background as you and see what they recommended. Because I can't tell you like, hey, step one, do this, step two, do
Yeah.
this. It would be super different. But I would say that uh, the resources that I link, like growth.design, like really read that. It will really make like differentiate you as a designer from other candidates. And also just there's this 100 days UI challenge where for 100 days, the site will email you a small prompt and you just like create a design or wireframe just based on that. And just, like you have to practice a little bit every day. And I didn't complete that challenge. I think I was like on the 40 days mark and I was like, okay, I think I got a pretty good feel for this UI already. I want to move into like how do I be a better researcher and how do I be a more like T-shaped, a more well-rounded designer. So I was like hopping here and there in terms of how I got started, and yeah, just watch a lot of Figma YouTube tutorials and just reach out to any friends who had a small business and if they want like a revamp on their website. And I know it's free work, but it's nice to like just get that practice and you can say that that is a real project for like a real person. It's not just like this dream like made up project that is non-existent. So
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's a good answer. So we only have about 2 minutes left, and I see that we have a couple questions in the chat.
yeah.
So the questions that I have, we'll just shelve them unless more come up, and we'll go to the Q&A board. So Thomas asked, can you suggest any certifications for product design and who offers them?
Yeah, I just made a video about this, but Coursera, they partnered with Google on a UX design course. I don't think I sent a link to you yet, but I'll follow up later so you can include them. But the course is free to enroll. But if you want that certificate to like post on your LinkedIn, then you have to pay. I forgot how much, maybe $40. I need to check again. But yeah, that is a course I recommend that because um, I've seen people taking them and just received pretty good feedback from my audience. So I would look into that. There's also General Assembly, where it's a more committed certificate. It's like you have to go on it full time. So if you are still doing this, like and juggling your full time job at the same time, then I wouldn't recommend going to a boot camp. But the good thing about Coursera or other online certificates is that you can be flexible and just schedule your own like timeline and when you want to finish that.
Okay, perfect. All right, I put a giant link in the comments for that Coursera certification that Marisa mentioned. So if you can click on it, please go ahead. Otherwise, you can just Google Coursera, Google Design Certificate or UX Certificate, and it's the first thing that comes up. So that should be good. Last question. How do you balance your work and your tasks that you do on the side?
Yeah, I have to confess, I can get burned out like really easily. Like, and you can ask my best friends. Like, I am very sensitive. um, this is something I'm still trying to figure out, and like prioritizing helps a lot. But I am very like my attention span can get really short. And I'm like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do that. Oh, let me do this. Let me pause this other side project that I've been working on. So I would say just be really selective with what you decided to work on during your downtime when you should be like resting or going out on a weekend. Like really make sure that that is something that is really interesting to you enough for you to like give up a couple hours for you to relax and like socialize with your friends in order to have that like super balance, work-life balance and not burn out. But yeah, I don't really have good advice except for prioritizing and
Yeah. I mean, that's just being honest. I feel like I'm the same way too. So, and that's the honest truth. So, thank you for sharing that. Um, so, since we're on time now, I just wanted to quickly mention that if you have any feedback about today's session at all, there's a survey link in the comments. Please let me know if you think we should have longer chats or shorter chats or anything at all. Please let me know. So I think since we're on time, I'll just open up the floor to you, Marisa. Do you have any parting words or anything that you want to share with folks before we end today's session?
yeah, I do. For those who are interested in going to a product design or UX designer, still unsure, or like if you're already a product designer and if you're unsure about design like yourself, like I think it's okay to just feel like I don't want to do this or I wish I go into this career instead. Like I think that we should be just listen to how you feel and how you just admit how you feel, and it's okay if you are not a product designer forever. Like nothing like lasts forever, so better make everything counts. I know this is kind of cheesy, but it's something I told myself like every day, like, hey, you might not be a product designer forever, and that's okay. Maybe your interests change, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Maybe like you tried product design for a little bit, going to a certificate, you didn't like it, that's okay too. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I hope that was helpful to some folks that are interested in starting this career. And please know that designers come in all shapes, sizes, and stripes. And so what Marisa does might not be what you end up doing as well. But I think learning something new never hurt anybody. And so I'd just like to say huge thanks to Marisa for joining us today, taking the time out of her very, very busy busy schedule these days to come and chat with us. This is being recorded, so if you want to come back to this at any point, please, you can just save this link, bookmark it, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Please subscribe to all of Marisa's content as well. She shares a lot more bite-sized pieces of information on all her channels. All those links are also in the check-in link that I shared, but I will share it again on the screen. Check out her podcast, her TikTok, her Instagram. There's a lot of fun stuff on there. And yeah, let me know how you like today's session on the survey. And thank you so much. Goodbye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody. Bye.